back here at KS Farm, surrounded by the rest of the team as well, a four-legged team. And we've also got Rob, our farrier, here, somewhere around, hidden behind a horse. So we're going to be talking all things horses and farrier today. So to start off with, I've obviously got one horse here already, and the others are all coming around quite a lot. What we're going to be doing is trimming the horse's feet and actually talking about remedial farriery. Farriery? Is that the right phrase? Farriery. Tongue twister. So we're going to kind of have a look at the horse's feet, and just Rob's going to hopefully, if it's all right, I'm going to hand over to you, talk through a little bit about what you're doing with Ryan's feet. So we can see his feet aren't quite the same as some of the others, and these are all barefoot horses, so they don't have any shoes on. And yeah, just see what happens.
So, see what we're looking at. So obviously, being only trimmed sort of 8 weeks ago, he's got a fairly standard amount of growth on his feet. Unfortunately, Ryan does suffer with a few superficial hoof wall cracks that can be trimmed out just through regular trimming. But sometimes they need a bit more sort of intervention. But this is just the frog that I'm trimming up now, just not really taking any height out of it because it's kind of like a cushion for the hoof capsule. So I just take the sides through and make it look nice and neat. He's not really got much foot on the bottoms of them other than a bit of heel. So I just take the heels down to a nice strong bearing surface rather than letting them run forward and roll over. Make sure the foot is nice and level and balanced, so the inside and the outside of the foot are level with each other and balanced to the horse's limb. And because Ryan's got a fairly straight front leg, it's pretty easy to achieve. Just pick away at these cavities and make sure he's not got any stones lurking around that can cause him any discomfort, which he doesn't in this one. Yeah, so that's from, it's really common to find like little bits packing up in this area, right on the widest point of the foot, or just behind the widest point of the foot around the heels, because when they take weight or they load through the foot, you can imagine like my thumbs being the heels, they move inwards and forwards, and the quarters, which are these points here, the widest points, move outwards. So you can imagine it kind of acts like a bit of a scoop, and it can collect a lot of mud and muck and a few little stones, and it's important to make sure they're all taken out because they can lead to infection or just discomfort really. But you can see on the front of these feet, or this foot in particular, unfortunately it's not in a very good state. He's got a few sort of superficial cracks here, one not so superficial crack here right on the toe quarter. So I'll dress from this sort of point around, take them back a bit, and then maybe excavate. You can see that crack's already starting to disappear. And then we might have to just take that one out a bit, or we will definitely have to take that one out a little bit to see what we're working with.
So this is when it kind of starts coming into very basic remedial farrier, doesn't it? When you've got the cracks and the kind of funny feet like Ryan's got.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, like I suppose genetics maybe don't help. I mean, that's one reason. But you can see they're already you're starting to lose the depth of them quite quickly. You see there, it's a bit like looks like Parmesan cheese. It's where it's you're getting a bit of sort of like fungal matter in there, and you see it just comes away quite easily. But there's not really any depth to them.
And the biggest thing is this doesn't actually hurt the horse, does it, when you're doing this? So for anybody watching, it does look quite kind of invasive in some ways because you're actually cutting away. But what Rob's doing isn't hurting Ryan at all. If it was, he wouldn't be kind of standing like he is.
No, not at all. This is just a really small, sharp-pointed knife, so you can really all I'm doing is just with no pressure, just letting the knife fall away, and you can see now you've got to the end of that, or the depth of that crack. Technically you will call it a sand crack because it does start from the coronary band down. It's what you call, there are four categories. It's what you call a non-complete, non-complicated, because it doesn't involve the coronary band and it doesn't involve any sensitive tissue. So it's, as they go, the best one to have, if you could say it's the best one. It's maintained really through foot trimming and hoof balance. If they get really bad, you can obviously repair them with acrylics, brace them with like certain acrylic or Kevlar patches, and then the next step would be to support the foot with a shoe, which wouldn't be your sort of conventional shoe that you think of, like your good luck shoe. It'd be what we call a bar shoe. So the heels of the shoe would be knitted together, and that would reduce the amount of sort of expansion and contraction in the foot, so make that crack less mobile or not mobile at all.
So it stabilises it in many ways, doesn't it?
Yeah. You see this one's much the same, but again there's no depth to it. They tend to get a bit grainy this time of year because, you know, the grass is now fairly dewy and we've had a bit of rain, and that fungal matter really likes that kind of still warm but moist, non-oxygenated. So that's why we open them up a little bit as well, to allow air and oxygen to get to them, and it will kill off that bacteria.
And unfortunately, Ryan, he doesn't have the best of feet, does he? They're not kind of the worst, but his sister's got not such great feet, so we know that it's probably the genetics.
Yeah.
And his mum, Magic, she's actually got Ryan, stop being unmanly. She's got a crack as well, so we think it's probably from her, and it's kind of gone through all of her babies. It doesn't seem to cause him too much of a problem, though, does it?
No, there's
really?
No lameness there. No, because they don't involve sensitive structures, and they've not been allowed to get worse or to become really serious. Then,
but I mean, it does highlight the kind of intervention, doesn't it? So without you actually here and without us actually making sure that you'll come in and kind of the intervention that we're putting in place, he probably wouldn't have such good feet, would he?
Yeah, basically.
Potentially.
Yeah. And I mean, I see him every 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, and the rest of it is down to your sort of stable management, isn't it? So when he comes in and has a bit of time off the wet ground, which is always good, and you know he gets food, which is good because nutrition plays a big part in hoof quality and hoof growth as well. This one is probably the best out of the four.
Stand still.
See, this frog, even though it's a bit sort of raggedy around the edges, which it will be because it's wearing naturally, is actually really symmetrical and really, you know, I wouldn't trim anything off that. It would just make it less functionable if I was to take anything off it.
Good boy.
When I hang the leg like that, I'll just make sure the horse is like super relaxed and not tense or holding it in a certain way that gives you a sort of misinformed view of his hoof balance.
Boris.
buzzing around. So it's put a nice rounded edge on the bottom of the foot so it doesn't chip up or crack from the bottom. I try to only, well, I do only rasp the sort of height I need. I have to come up a little bit higher than I'd normally like to with my rasp just to explore this sort of cracked area here. But there's like a really nice varnishy layer over these feet, which is called a stratum, which just means layer in Latin, tectorum, and it's kind of a bit like the cuticles on your fingernails. So it actually protects the main body of the hoof and acts as like a moisture regulator. And it's, you know, it's pointless just rasping it off just to make a foot look super shiny and you know, super smooth. You'd be taking away the functionality of the foot if you were to do that all the time, and you know, form over or function over aesthetics, I guess, is trying to get at. Yeah, this one's much the same again. It's, you can see the total depth of it, although it doesn't look very pretty. It's, you know, all of that granularized horn needs to be taken out just to make sure it doesn't fester away in there. And if they're really bad, what you could do is almost like a bit of a not a controversial sort of way of doing it, but it's kind of a really good way of doing it is you'd sort of debride all of the sort of fungalized horn and you'd actually cover it over again. But to do that, you'd have to make sure everything is
really clean
out.
and sanitary, yeah.
And you cover it with certain sort of
synthetic material, is it? Like
Kevlar? Like acrylics that would, not so much Kevlar, because Kevlar would allow permeation of water to get in behind the patch. It would have to be like a totally sealed, like acrylic or plastic-based thermoplastic, that sort of thing. And that will grow down with the hoof.
Yeah, and then just grow off.
And it would just grow off, yeah. But to do that, it has to be totally like...
And we wouldn't want to do that on Ryan anyway. It's not really a need,
no,
is there?
No. That'd be in like more serious cases, yeah.
Boris, come away. So the back feet are always a little bit different because Ryan actually, as a youngster, he broke his pelvis. So he has slightly uneven feet anyway. And then obviously with his broken pelvis and that, the kind of associated injury and a muscle loss, his feet are a little bit different. I don't think he's got that many that are the same really, is he? But rather than actually being a working horse, we're using for equine therapy. So he still works, but in a different way. Thank you. Good boy.
Which is actually kind of great that he's got something like, he's really good to use for that, because if he was in full work, we probably would have to make some sort kind of interventions with these hoof wall cracks, and makes life a little bit more complicated. But hind feet tend to be a different shape as well to front feet. They tend to be almost more triangular, and that just reflects the shape of the pedal bone, which is the main bone that we'd all think about inside the hoof capsule. In a hind foot, it tends to sit slightly higher, and the solar surface, so there's the bottom of the pedal bone, the sort of, if you were to take this off, the surface you'd see is more concaved. And the reason being is that the concavity of a hind foot aids in propulsion. So when a horse moves and pushes itself forward, it kind of acts like a great big scoop to be able to dig and push. So that just reflects the shape of it. You can kind of see straighter through these portions here, and then there's more of a definite kink around from the quarter. Again, I don't like to over trim soles on barefooted horses because, you know, the sole's there for protection and they don't have a shoe there, so we want to leave as much natural protection as we can. Same with a frog. It might look a little bit scraggly with, you know, these little flaps here and there, but you know, you could spend all day trimming it up and making it look super pretty, but again, it would lose a great deal of function. So that's off. Again, just make sure I put a nice bevel on the feet, just to make sure he's got a nice rounded edge, kind of like you would on a piece of wood or something like that. It stops it from chipping and breaking up. You can see he's got rather significant toe quarter crack there. Good boy. Which we'll have a little look at. So this for example would be, it's a bit more significant than the cracks in front, purely because of where it's positioned, and its sort of depth and width. I think if Ryan was in work and being ridden, and that this would be something that we would have to address, and probably, well, we would definitely brace it and then work forward with that with a shoe underneath just to support the foot. But at the moment, what I like to do when they're like this is just kind of float the area a bit, so the crack isn't actually weighted at all. It will obviously move because the whole foot wants to move, but there'll be no sort of direct weight going through the crack itself. That's better. Swan boy. There's quite a bit of foot to come off. You can see that sort of grainy, unexfoliated sole. That's what I quite like to take a little bit out, just to make sure the foot is healthy, but you know, leaving them out in there as a way of protecting the bottom of the foot. So when I look at this foot, I can see that the outside of the foot is higher than the inside as well, because there's a great big flare here. So that must mean that there's a greater point of contact through this point, pushing that outer hoof forward outwards. I've got a bit like a lever point, so although there's not a great deal of foot to take off the bottom, we'll definitely take a snip it off and make sure we dress that flare off in a second when I take the foot forward. And you can also see the frog kind of wants to go that way as well, so that's another good indicator as to your hoof balance.
So this is probably Ryan's worst foot, isn't it?
This is, yeah, this crack is unfortunately the worst one out of the lot. Again, just because of the depth of it, we'll have a look into that in a second and see how it's looking. But again, this would be something that if he was like if he was jumping or even just being ridden, you'd definitely want to treat that.
We've got a horse rolling in the background. Boris is just investigating. Boo! I think he's having a good old roll there. Mommy, mind your nose. Boris, come away. Come away, good boy. Mum's having a lie down, right?
Let's take that little bit out of there just to float it off the ground a little bit.
I think for me, it's always good to see when the cracks are actually treated, because it does bring home that kind of, if it was a horse in the wild, then it possibly wouldn't actually happen. Maybe it's because they're domesticated. I don't know.
What's that song?
Would they still crack in the wild in the
Yeah.
same way?
Oh yes.
They
Yeah.
would?
Yeah. Absolutely. To be fair, most hoof wall cracks are, well, I say most. I mean, hoof abscesses. So if you get a foot abscess that breaks at the top of the foot around the coronary band, because that is where the sort of cellular layer that produces the hoof wall begins, you could have like a permanent growth defect from that point. So you could absolutely
So it could be wild horses, yeah.
Some pretty nasty hoof wall cracks. You can see this is actually, it's not quite as bad as it kind of looked when it's packed full of muck.
But it does show the importance, the importance of actually keeping an eye on them and actually treating them, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Like you might even be able to, it's a bit hard to see on the grass, and it might be a bit hard to see. But this one does actually move a bit. So if he was to non-weight bear on it, which would encourage him to do, and to fully weight bear on it, you'd probably be able to see the crack just slightly closes up, which isn't particularly good. That would be something that actually we might even have to address with him.
Yeah.
Regardless.
Okay.
Just get on top of that, and
because if it's mobile, it can do more damage, can't it? Really,
yeah.
For layman's terms.
And because he's not lame, right? That's fantastic. So his sort of welfare is, we'll help him out with that, and keep him sound. You can see once you sort of trim off those sort of flared edges, you've taken away any sort of point of contact through the crack. So this shouldn't really get any worse. But as like a matter of caution, it's something you could look into, is to brace it with a patch.
Yeah.
Or
just support it a bit more.
Yeah, and supporting the bottom of the foot as well is really important, because when they take weight, they don't actually walk on their bone columns.
Yeah.
The bone columns are suspended inside the hoof capsule.
Yeah.
By laminae. So if you can imagine, every time they walk, the bone column sinks and the sole sinks and flattens. It's concaved like this, so when they walk, it flattens outwards. It pulls the hoof wall.
Yeah, so there's going to be movement.
So there's a lot of movement there. So if you can support the bottom of the foot with like a pack-in or a heart bar or anything along those lines, that would really help as well.
Yeah.
It's just like a different dynamic to look at.
So I think that's Ryan all done now, isn't it, for the minute?
He's all done.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll move on to the next one, but we'll send you guys back to the studio, and we'll keep you in the link with with Ryan's story and how he gets on with his feet, really. So we'll see you soon.